Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. With Red Bull's downfall the major topic of discussion over the last couple of weeks, it seems Red Bull themselves are not exactly happy with McLaren and Mercedes' development direction. They believe the front wings of their cars may well be illegal or over the line of what the FIA is meant to allow. Both Red Bull and Ferrari are actually seeking clarification on this. They say that if the FIA deem these wings to be legal, they will do them themselves, or they want arguably McLaren especially to change their front wing to potentially change the tide of the way the season is going so far. Is this the classic Red Bull, or many teams in the Formula 1 sport over the last several years, they're winning, their car must be illegal, or is there something more to this? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, a couple of things after the Monza Grand Prix. You guys remember during the weekend when James Vowles made the rather scathing comments, you could argue, about effectively Mick Schumacher, right? Saying that, well, Sargent and Mick Schumacher are not special drivers, that's why we've gone for Colapinto instead, although that it's not like he called him special. It was like, well, I meant special in the context of, you know, the Sennas or the world champions of this world. And Corinna Schumacher, of course, Mick's mother, was not so happy about this, and apparently went and made her feelings known, shall we say, in a quite public setting. So I don't know if there were any cameras on this or any Netflix cameras on this, but if they were, maybe we'll get to see it at some point. Just a quick update on McLaren. We talked yesterday the fact that Andrea Stella had made the admission that effectively choosing a number one driver is not only possible, but it may well happen. He actually went on to make the following statement: we'll review all of these things for the next races, and if we come to the conclusion together that swapping is the right thing to do, then we will do it. But as we said yesterday, arguably this is going to end up being too little too late as far as Lando Norris's World Drivers' Championship ambitions go this season. But the situation of McLaren still seems rather mixed, because obviously Norris is saying, yeah, I'd love to be the de facto number one and the driver that they prioritise, but I'm not going to sit there and beg him to pull over and let me past, especially when there are still rumours circulating as to exactly what Mark Webber might have put in Piastri's contract. And, you know, I want to be clear really on what I said about Piastri over the last couple of days. I don't have any problem with the way that Piastri behaved, given the understanding we have of what McLaren are doing behind the scenes. Like, if I was in Piastri's position, I'm doing the same thing. You got an opportunity for a move against Lando into turn 4. Sure, you can argue, was it slightly over the line because it's teammates, especially given the 1-2, but, you know, you're going to try and win the races. That's what you're here to do. That's what you're paid to do by McLaren. But equally, if McLaren say, hey, we pay you to drive as we want you to drive, and they make the decision behind the scenes that he's going to be supporting Lando's Drivers' Championship ambitions from now to the end of the season, as you can argue that he should be, given that Lando's outperformed him in the championship this year, and realistically Piastri's not in that championship conversation, hasn't been for a long time. If that's the case, then sure, but as McLaren seem to be behaving, you know, Piastri's well within his rights to do, I think, as he's done. It's just whether McLaren should manage the situation differently, which I personally think they should. And Zak Brown made some, I think, quite remarkable statements here, and genuinely Red Bull's biggest asset right now in both of their championship ambitions is McLaren themselves, because Zak Brown says, we have two number one drivers, that's our philosophy, which does make me wonder, like, whether it genuinely is contractually baked in to Piastri's contract that they have to both be number ones. But he says, we've seen it with Senna and Prost, which is like, sure, but it's not like those guys didn't come to blows either. And, you know, McLaren's management back then, you could argue, wasn't exactly ideal. And, you know, are we really comparing Norris and Piastri to Senna and Prost yet? I mean, feels a little bit early, doesn't it, right? And obviously there's been joke about this because, you know, we had the papaya rules, and papaya rules is just so easy to take the piss out of that everyone has been, and I think for very good reason. I mean, what are we talking about, guys? What are we talking about? Are we a serious team? I swear a serious team doesn't talk about papaya rules, but, you know, it is what it is. The reality is they have a good car, and they have a good driver, a good couple of drivers. Maybe not great, you know, in terms of the context of World Championship level yet, but there's some question on whether they can get there, and, you know, the reality is that it's still very much on for Norris. We'll have a look at the numbers in a second. It's not over yet. He needs to close in by 8 points on Verstappen every weekend, and he did that again this weekend. It wasn't pretty, but he did close in by 8 points just about. The constructors is still interesting because I think Ferrari are at like 407, so Ferrari are actually not out of it yet either. Like genuinely, Red Bull could end up third in this year's championship. That's not impossible at all. Verstappen is either going to be first or second in the drivers, likely first. But have a look at this. So this is Azerbaijan, Singapore, Austin, Mexico. This is the Sao Paulo Grand Prix in Brazil. Then Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi. if, let's say, Max comes 5th at every Grand Prix from now until Qatar and gets 10 points, this is actually not including sprint races either, so let's just assume that in sprints they get the same amount of points. But even then, right, let's say Norris wins a sprint and Max is 5th in the sprint. That's another 4-point differential, and I think there are 3 sprints from now to the end of the year, so it's definitely still possible. Like, if the Red Bull performs as it has done in the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort and in Monza on average from now to the end of the year, this is not implausible. Lando would have to win 3 races, he'd have to come 2nd in one, 3rd in one, a couple of 4th places, and that would tie him up going into Abu Dhabi, right? So this is kind of where we currently are, like, over these rounds, and obviously not even including sprints. It's absolutely still possible, especially if Verstappen is not guaranteed 2nd if Lando wins. Verstappen is not even guaranteed anywhere near a podium. Like, you know, he's not won for the last 6 rounds now, and he's not been on the podium that much in that time frame either. Interesting comments from Perez as well, saying how Verstappen is now in the same boat that he's been in for most of the season. Now, on some level, this sounds like Perez is kind of using it as, well, I might be underperforming, but at least Max is like struggling too type thing. What do you guys think about the idea? Because I know this has been floated around of Red Bull have found out that their car performs a bit better and is maybe more consistent when they bake a bit of understeer into the car. Or you can look at it 2 ways. Either they have found their car behaves better since the recent downgrades that they've clearly brought, or whatever's happened with their car over the last couple of months, with a bit more understeer in the car that suits Sergio Perez more than it does Max Verstappen. Or, given Perez's poor performance, did they say, all right, we need Perez to turn up here if we want to win this Constructors, so let's, you know, develop the car or push the setup in a way that's going to help Perez a bit more. Obviously, that fight, I think, has been fought. Like, they're not going to win the Constructors. They're a couple of points ahead, but that's going to evaporate over the next couple of rounds. So, you know, do we think that it's possible that over the next couple of rounds they might say, all right, well, Constructors is over. Let's now switch the car balance back to more so favour Max with as much turn-in as possible, and, you know, and therefore Max is going to have the best chance to defend the driver's title? Maybe, but I don't know. My feeling is just their car has gone away from them so much that even Verstappen is confused as to what he can do to get the best out of this thing right now. And even as Horner says, we have upgrades on the way to potentially address some of it, but there is a feeling that Red Bull are not going to be able to solve all of these problems until next year, and even then, who knows if they even can. Adrian Newey isn't there anymore, right? So that's the concern for Red Bull in the long term, but of course in the shorter term, they might bring some upgrades and they might be able to help their case, but as Toto says, it's really weird what's happened. You know, that's not the same Red Bull as it was at the start of the year when they were absolutely dominant, so it's confusing to everyone. Red Bull say it's confusing to them themselves. Mercedes are also a bit concerned because they believe they might have lost a bit of pace. Obviously, after the summer break, it's not been quite as good for them. The Dutch Grand Prix, they brought their upgrade. Their new floor is better than the old floor, but maybe it's circuit specific to some degree because, look, the reality is that Mercedes made a big mistake in 2022 when they chased peak downforce over ride compliance and stability of the car. Adrian Newey was adamant back in 2022 that was what Red Bull needed to do. Design a car that was going to be compliant and stable and not suffer with all the problems that everybody else did. Might not generate the most peak downforce, but was by far generating the most consistent downforce over the course of a lap. It's incredible in a way how it seems like Red Bull, in their chase for peak downforce in the last year, have effectively managed to suffer from what Mercedes had in 2022 when they've taken that wrong step as a result of that. Mercedes, I think, have finally got it right, but even then, they brought their new floor to chase more downforce, and maybe the balance isn't quite so good now, and they're struggling a bit with that. Obviously, their car, they never expected Mercedes to be consistently at the front, even after what happened in Silverstone and in Spa and stuff like that. But I think they would have expected to be closer than they have been over the last couple of rounds. How much of that performance, though, from Mercedes is derived, at least in part, from the front wing? It's always a big talking point because the front wing is arguably on the car the most aerodynamically important piece. It determines how all of the airflow gets to the rest of the vehicle. And I don't know why I said it like that, but yeah, vehicle, car, machine, whatever you want to say. Helmut Marko says the front wing of the McLaren and the Mercedes must be analysed. Now, this is on some ways classic Red Bull, but it's also kind of like classic any top team in Formula 1. When another team is doing rather well and has made substantial progress, maybe not to your liking, you will say, they must be cheating. It's got to be illegal. There's clearly something going on here. And that's what Marco says about McLaren and Mercedes. Now, is this true or not? But it has been confirmed over the last couple of days now that there is a clarification request from not just Red Bull, but actually also Ferrari. So it seems like McLaren and Mercedes are doing something with their front wing that both Ferrari and Red Bull are not, and they want to know, is it illegal, and therefore they need to be, obviously punished rather severely, or have to change that front wing by clarifying the rules, or is it legal, and therefore they will have to develop their own one, but by the time they do, that will be quite a way down the line. So there's new onboard footage of the Italian Grand Prix. Let's have a look at it about now. This is not the Italian Grand Prix. This is back in 2021, I believe. We're looking at the Mercedes front wing, just to show you guys that it's not like Flexiwings are a new topic. They've been around in the sport forever. And this is because the front wing or any aerodynamic part is never going to be fully rigid. It's just not possible. It also would be incredibly unsafe if it was fully rigid as well. So there's always going to be some flexibility in play. The question is always how much flexibility you should be allowed, because there is some aerodynamic advantage to be gained if you can allow the wing to flex more than it's legally able to. Now, the way that they test this is just the back and forth here of the Mercedes in 2021 when it's on the straight, when it's got maximum load, of course, because the faster the car goes, the more load is generated by the car, therefore the more the wing is flexed as a result. And when it's in the corners, you guys can see quite a clear difference. Maybe not as dramatic, however, as this year's McLaren, as we'll see in a second. So there is some advantage to be gained here, and the way that the FIA tests the wings is that they put like they call it a static load test. They'll put a load on the wing at a certain point and they'll see how much it flexes, and if it flexes within what's allowed, that's fine. If it flexes more, it's not allowed. Now, engineers are kind of clever, and as a result of this, they are able to make the wing flex potentially more under actual aerodynamic load when the car is moving than it does under a static load test. So this has always been a thing, and it probably always will be a thing, but the wing can potentially deform more than it's allowed to, but you can't test it while it's driving at 200 kilometers an hour, so you can effectively get away with it, right? But this is the back and forth here. This is the McLaren front wing at the Italian Grand Prix this past weekend, and we can quite clearly see this is on the straight at basically maximum speed through the speed trap down the Monza straight, and this is through the corner, through the first chicane. So, again, pretty dramatic flexing of the front wing, and especially comparing this section of the wing here, you guys see where they come together here during the corners, and on the straights you can see how far apart this is. So these wing elements flexing, it's not a new thing, it shouldn't be a surprise. The question is this too much? Red Bull's front wing does not seem to flex this much. McLaren's and Mercedes do seem to flex this much. So this is why, it's just timing, isn't it? Because at the start of the season, Red Bull are winning everything. They're not complaining about McLaren's front wing, and maybe it's been an upgrade they've brought that's made it more flexible, I don't know. But as soon as things start to go wrong, all of a sudden it's like, oh well, this team must be doing something dodgy. And maybe they are, but then again, this is what the sport is all about, pushing the limits of what is allowed within the regulations, as Red Bull have certainly done over the last few years as well. The front wing designs are different. You guys can see the comparison here that the race put together between the Red Bull front wing, the McLaren front wing, the Mercedes front wing. They're very different in multiple ways, but the flexibility of the McLaren and the Mercedes seems to be more than anyone else is capable of. That arguably is just good engineering, but it's something that the Red Bull team and the Ferrari team want some clarification on. This is actually the statements that were made. Christian Horner says the regulations are very clear. It's an issue for the FIA. Their tests, McLaren and Mercedes, have passed, but then you've got to consider the wording of the regulation. So in some ways it's kind of funny for Horner and Red Bull to be talking about this. If you look back at 2021, particularly around the time of Baku, there was a change to the front wing regulations, and even though our wings passed the test, they were exploiting aero-elasticity is what he called it. This is an FIA issue, we'll leave it to them to handle, and if it's deemed acceptable, then we will have to join in. And as Vasseur says, we will handle it internally with the FIA. So it's not just Red Bull that are saying this, and there's obviously some clarification potentially in play. And if Red Bull do find out that yes, this is possible, and therefore they produce a front wing which aligns with this, how much performance is that going to give them? Probably a bit, but probably not enough to make up the deficit they're currently experiencing, right? That is the problem they are currently suffering with, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon because it's a multifaceted problem. Verstappen calls the car a monster. He says the car's gone from being the most dominant car ever last season to effectively a monster of a car this year. And even You can probably guess who said this, but I'll give you a few seconds if you haven't worked it out, or not worked it out. It's difficult, but it's Ralf Schumacher. He's done it again. He was asked in the media what's going to happen, and he says, yeah, if Red Bull don't turn it around, heads will roll, which is a pretty classic Ralf Schumacher thing to say. There's obviously been talk with the Red Bull situation about Adrian Newey, right? Because whether, you can't bring him back at this point. He's not working with the team anymore in an F1 capacity. He was last spotted in the paddock with Red Bull a good couple of months ago now. He's not been working on the F1 operation day to day since May, at least, something like that. We think he's going to join Aston Martin. Apparently this is the month we're going to find out about that. The rumour has it that there was something in Newey's contract which meant that it had to be until September when he can actually effectively announce when his next destination was going to be. We thought it was going to be Ferrari, but then apparently Newey wanted lots of veto power and decision-making power on the internal structure of that technical team. Vasseur said, I don't want to be demoted, effectively, because if Vasseur said yes to Newey's demands, Newey in some sense would also be like a co-team principal, at least according to rumours. Vasseur didn't seem to want that, and therefore Aston, they're willing to basically give Newey everything that he wants, it seems. So apparently that's what's going to happen, but even Alonso says Newey is not enough to fix our problems. So it's seemingly a bit of a disaster class for them, but 2026 really is going to be the goal when Newey joins. And Christian Horner even commented on this and said that their development trajectory has been nothing to do with Newey departing. There is obviously some degree of correlation here. It doesn't necessarily mean there's causation, but equally, it's not like they're going to be able to bring Newey back to fix all their problems. So massively interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.